Everybody, welcome to another edition of Practical Pet Chat. We're going to continue the conversation that we started recently about allergies because there is no more allergy season. It's just an ongoing thing. Several of you have sent us some questions and reached out. And Lauren, it's good to see you.
Same.
We were talking, um, as we said, this is a very deep, very long conversation with many facets to it. And while there are pathways, I'm not sure that there are direct ways to that final destination that all of us pet parents would like to get to. You got to put in work, you got to put in time, you got to put in effort. You've really got to. Oh, wait, I think Lauren also said journal in the last
Ugh,
one. So I am looking where we're headed. But Lauren, let's
karma.
yeah, let's pick it up from where we were kind of talking because there really are a lot of elements to this. And the one pathway that I think you and I would both agree that is shouldn't be the first pivot is that pharma pivot that unfortunately all too many people go to because they just don't have an understanding or the patience to do some of the things that we're talking about. How would you address them and say, hey, just take a breath, take a beat, and start here? Because I think that's the question I get most. Like, I don't even know where to start. Where should I start?
Well, you have to start with understanding that the difference between allergies and insensitivities, or sensitivities, I should say. You can be sensitive to something and not necessarily have an allergic reaction to it. So if you take a look at what defines an allergic reaction, it's usually something like an anaphylactic reaction, difficulty breathing, hives, the typical reactions that come with all allergies for all species. Um, a lot of times, chewing at oneself, being generally itchy, being red isn't necessarily an allergy as much as it is a sensitivity. And an animal can be sensitive, anyone can be sensitive to a combination of things. So if you look at all the factors involved, I mentioned on the last episode about allergies that lighter colored animals are more prone to allergies or sensitivities. If you look at a compilation of things, if you're a lighter colored animal, if you compound environmental with um, consumption and chemical products involved along the way, is it an allergy? And how would you determine what the kid is allergic to? Or is it a compilation of sensitivities that all built up to create a reaction? So it's interesting to note that there are very few allergies to food ingredients for most animals. There are usually sensitivities, and it's a sensitivity to a combined assortment of ingredients and potentially other factors as well. So to answer your question, you have to start with mitigation. You have to remove as many things as possible. You have to get down to the fewest amount of ingredients. And this is not long term. I had a client one time who I had sent to, she wouldn't listen to me no matter what I told her. And she was getting advice from 20 different places. And, you ask 20 different people their advice, you're going to get 20 different answers. So you have to decide who you're going to follow and you have to stick to that for a while, right? In order to see if that's working. So after a year and a half with her, I sent her to a homeopathic holistic vet of my a friend of mine who's out of state. And I said, really, why don't you set up a consultation with him and see what he can do for you? She came in and was just outraged with me because how dare I send her to a vet that recommended a vegetarian diet, for the dog. And I was like, okay, after I calmed her down, I said, what was the amount of time involved? She goes, well, 2 weeks. But I learned from you that these are carnivores. I said, okay, calm down. It's 2 weeks. I understand this vet and I know what he's after. He's trying to get down to, let's see if it's a protein. So we'll eliminate all the proteins and we'll go with vegetarian. This is not a quick fix. And everybody's going to have a slightly different way of doing it. For me, I would take it down to a base number of ingredients, the fewest I could possibly get away with the kid, and see how that went. And then usually that's a protein. I would try another protein after that and try to identify which proteins are fine. And then I would probably add in one or two ingredients. And we'd go with that, with those different proteins for a couple of weeks. How do these additional ingredients combined with each one of these proteins? Does the kid tolerate it? Are they red? Has the itching reduced? All of that. So you continue along that path until you're able to determine what's working for the kid. But when that doesn't work, I also have to remind the pet parent, what are you using for cleaning in the house? You know, what are you using for your washing, for your laundry? What are you using in the dryer? What kind of softener are you using? How frequently have you kept the bedding clean? How frequently do you vacuum? And it's not a judgment. I'm not judging people who don't have the time to run around their house and, vacuum every hour or whatever. But it's like if you haven't vacuumed in a week or more, then I want to start with as clean of a baseline as possible. So let's vacuum everything, let's wash everything. Oh, by the way, try to do things that are fragrance free, that have as few ingredients in them as possible. Animal safe, cleaning ingredients with as few ingredients as possible that are more nature based. I love vinegar, white vinegar, and water. I'm not a big fan of things smelling like a salad, but it only lasts for about an hour, and it dissipates. There's a number of things that can be utilized for cleaning that clean very well and have no negative effect on the animal. The thing I always love is when people tell me, well, there's no way my kid could be sensitive or allergic to this. And I'm like, how come? Well, because no one ever is. Okay. Well, I know people that are allergic to black pepper. I mean, who would ever think that? Black pepper is in everything. If you ever read in the ingredient panels, it's everywhere. It's not just the typical seafood, or chicken or those kinds of things. Um, there are a number of triggers for how a body is going to react, and they work together to assault the body. But even one you have to get the body as calm as possible. Everything is an inflammatory response, right? So that's how you know something negative is going on. If there's inflammation anywhere in the body is rallying all of its resources to try to alert through red flags, this is what's going on, and try to combat that. So if the pet parent is willing to commit to the course of going through all this, the chances are we can generally get to a place where we've got balance. And I say that with a little bit of a cautionary statement. If I don't see this kid until they're 10 and this kid's been like this for 8 or 9 years, it's going to take a lot longer to get to there, and I may not be able to get there in totality because it builds up, right? It's
Right.
cumulative. And the more that the immune system is worn down, the less it has to fight back with. So there has to be a dose of reality in that. Now, I've taken kids that were 8 or 9 years old and they've been dealing with something for 5 years and had amazing results. And I've taken kids that have only been dealing with something for a couple years, and that kid is so inflamed and so yeast ridden and allergy slash sensitivity laden that we got to haul, and we may not be able to mitigate it all. So there's no easy answer. I wish there were. But certainly the answer is not to take an immune system that's busy doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is fighting back, and completely demolish it with a chemical or a drug, because then you've got no hope.
Yeah. No, and I love the nod here to quite often it is also just not one trigger. And one of the things that I'll hear from folks, and you called it out earlier, is, "Oh my gosh, I just found out my dog can't eat this or my cat can't eat that." And it's, I hate to always be the guy in the room go, "Are we sure?" But I was like, "Are we sure?" Because to your point, there are other things mixed in with that, and all of it becomes, I mean, when you're starting from what you're starting with and then adding anything else to it, you're not typically improving it enough to have those additional elements in there overcome the situation you're in. I also love that you talked about too the uh, environment, and we touched on that briefly the other day. And it's funny, I was watching Belle do something. I had taken some stuff out of the car, brought it into the house, and I tease her quite often. I'll say, you better check. I want to make sure this is safe to come in the house. And I had moved her from my storage unit back over to the house. And the weird part was she had this little like circle, of dust on her nose. And I was like, well, shit, I thought I, took care of all that. But I also was like, Belle, the way you snort everything that comes in here, I'm not sure you didn't just pull that from a field in Kansas, because think about that. But it is just this deep inhaling and all the rest. And it's funny because, it made me more aware. And since I've been driving around with Belle in the car, in the back seat, by the way, but since I've been driving around with Belle in the back seat with her seatbelt on, when she puts her nose to the window to smell, it is like listening to a vacuum turn itself on. And so I thought to myself, well, that's crazy. We're sitting here just, where we were at. We were waiting for one of my daughters to be done at an event, and there was trees there. And I could see the pollen falling from there, right? So if today I went, oh, Belle's got an allergic reaction, am I going to remember all the different places that we've been to? Because that's the other part of this is that the instant reaction you shared it last time with your friend. I'm going to pave my entire backyard, which is phenomenal, but doesn't get you the results you want. Love the effort, not the outcome, right? So I think that as you're talking about these things, it really spurns in me and hopefully all the rest of you that there's a lot to factor in. So have patience and grace for yourself. You will get it right. Because as you pointed out, if you do these things and you give it the time to go through, and I know it's awful to watch our pets in any kind of discomfort, but half measures or quick overreactions don't typically get us the results we really need anyway. And so I just wanted to call that out to everybody out there is so often the things we're talking about, it starts with just taking a breath, exhaling, and developing a what's my plan of approach on this? And what things do I need to gather, whether it's physical things, whether it's the recollection, where have we been, all the rest of that. Prior to us jumping on this, I took Belle for a nice long, long walk, and we walked in a whole bunch of different environments. She was in grass, she was in dirt, she was in sand, she was, I live in a pretty fun area for dogs, but there's also too the thing that jumped out at me because I saw three of them, but you've got the coyotes out there too, right? What are they traipsing through and dropping that now Belle's walking through? So there's just so much to think about this. So it's not surprising that there are going to be times where I think one of my animals is having an allergic reaction. And it may not be a full blown allergic reaction that needs to see substantial change as much as awareness of what did we just do that may have exposed her to something that's causing a reaction. So I'll stop it there. But I think your approach is one that I really appreciate because it does take that wider range. And that's where I see a lot of people failing themselves and failing their pets.
What's interesting too is the information that a lot of people aren't aware of, that really doesn't create a level playing field to figure this out. There's a number of animal vaccines that are grown in chicken embryos. So when you inject an animal with a vaccine, and this does not apply to every animal, just like nothing applies across the board to every living being. There is a propensity of animals who can become sensitive, allergic, depending on what's actually going on to chicken.
Right.
And as a result, what you saw was, for the longest time, the number one protein that was fed was chicken, right? And the more that the body is exposed to something, maybe it's not a full-blown allergy, but the more it's exposed to it, sourcing matters, the quality matters, all of that. But the more the body's exposed to the same thing over and over and over, the more sensitive it can become. The opposite is true too, where if you expose the body to something it's sensitive to in very small amounts, you can build up a tolerance. I'm allergic to bee stings, and there's a number of things that I have done to try to mitigate my reaction in very small amounts to that. Um, so, what happened after animals became super sensitive to chicken? They went to their vets, and the vets went, try beef. Guess what happened? Now we have sensitivities to beef.
Right.
And it again is the overload the body, overload the body. You never change the sourcing, the recipe, the ingredients, the combination of ingredients, the recipe, all of that. And so the body is just hit with the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And people don't understand why the body responds like it does. But that's because they don't do that. You never see a human that will eat the same thing over and over and over and over and over, the same brand, the same recipe, the same formula, the same thing, day in and day out. And people come to me and go, they get bored, don't they? It isn't so much of a boredom thing as it is a let's nourish the body's natural setup, how it's built to operate. And to do that, you need an assortment of proteins. You need an assortment of vegetables. You need a variety of recipes, sourcing from different places because sourcing on the East Coast is different from sourcing on the West Coast, just as an example. And and that has an effect. It's the difference between feeding something that has no antibiotics, no hormones, that kind of thing, versus something that does. All of those things, everything you ingest, everything that comes in contact with the body, whether it's transdermally, whether it's through ingestion, it all has a cause and effect on the body, positive or negative. Unfortunately, in today's world, it's heavily negative. And that's just because our soil and water and plants and crops and animals are sadly depleted in their nutrients compared to what they used to be. And we're still headed down that path. So if you round this out, and you don't have to do anything extreme, have three or four different things you can rotate through. So whatever it is, let's say you pick four brands of something, and every month you rotate a different brand, different protein, different combination of ingredients, different plant matter, all of that kind of thing. That kid is only going to get that same thing 3 times a year. Think about that. Now, I'd like to see it a little bit more frequently, but I work with people's limitations on what works with them. So if it's, you want to do this once a month, great, I'll work with that because it's better than where we were. if you can do this twice a month, if you can do this every month, I mean, every week, however you can do it, that's what we'll work with. And you're going to come across something where you go, ooh, that particular brand and combination didn't work for Fifi, so we're going to just let that one go. We'll find something else. The other thing that's great about it is how many times have we seen companies sell? They get new ownership. They build new plants, they change their recipes, they change their sourcing, whatever, and we're not paying any attention and we don't know why something is different. If you have to remove something out of the diet because you're not good with its sourcing, you're not good with where it's being made, you're not good with your animal's reaction to it, you've got three or four other things that you can fall back on that you don't have to do the typical thing that I see in storage, which is, oh my God, this is all my kid can eat. Right off the bat, I'm not even thinking anymore about what it is that they're needing to remove. I'm thinking about why. Why has that happened? Why have we gotten to this point that you have stuck with the same thing day in and day out because it's convenient, really, and not rotated proteins, not rotated brands, not rotated recipes, all of that kind of thing. And you'll notice I'm not talking about a form of food here. Now
Right.
I have a particular preference where I like to see as much real whole food as possible given to, anything that's ingesting anything. But I realize that that's not a one size fits all for everybody. So it doesn't have to be. Take whatever it
Yeah.
is you're feeding, you can add to that and you can still rotate. You can still switch things up.
Yeah. And you just said something that I want to do, just hit on for a second, because I think I see this mistake often. I'm guilty of it myself on occasion. Sorry, Bill. Um, I'm making something for myself. I don't make it any differently, and I share it with Belle. Well, if she's got any allergies to anything I have now put into my recipe, my food, my this, my that, the notion of, oh, I'm just sharing, this is good. I'm sharing, something that's human grade, which we'll talk about at some point. Uh, but keep that in mind as well, because I'll ask people, oh gosh, and they'll say, like you said, oh, they couldn't be because when I eat, I share my, scraps with them. Well, how'd you prepare those? Because you may be contributing some of this with extra spices, extra seasonings, whatever it may be, that your dog's or cat or bird or whatever else system is not meant to have. And that's a big part of that awareness as well. But I'll just say, I've had to learn myself because, like you, I'm a big proponent of, hey, anything as close to real is better for them, their system. That's the nature of animals. Um, but I try and always, when I know I'm going to have, more than I need, I've got a little separate, pot or pan or both for, my dogs and what I'm preparing for them so that it's not adulterated with extra things that they just don't need.
So it can be easier than that even. Um, I live in barbecue country now. But even when I was on the West Coast, people are like, so if I'm just, cooking out, I can give my dog that? Yes, rinse it off. If you make a
Sure.
steak or whatever and you bring it in the house, no dog has ever turned down rinsed off meat. They don't look at it like we do.
Oh,
You rinse off that barbecue sauce, you rinse off those spices and that rub, and you can even rub it a little bit to get it off of there and pat it dry. You don't even have to do that. And put it down, and that kid is going to snarf that because it's the
yeah.
real thing. The other thing I used to hear a lot of was, I know it's really bad to give animals, people food. And I'm like, okay, can we just break that down for a second? If that's the case, let's take what do you feed? Give me what you
Right.
feed. Let's turn the bag around. Look, you recognize those ingredients until you get to a certain part.
Sure.
But you recognize these ingredients? Broccoli, chicken,
Pea.
turkey, peas. Those are all things you eat.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the problem is in the processing.
correct.
It's not a whole food. So if you can take those same things and just leave them whole
Yeah,
and give them to your kid, you're far and away much further ahead, or add them to their bowl or whatever.
yeah,
But you're absolutely right that they don't need the flavorings. It's too much for them. Their stomachs are too sensitive. They don't need the spices and that kind of stuff. They're going to think it's yummy just the way they that it comes. Remember, they're eating probably a processed food and they're going to snarf anything real.
yeah. Well, and I do want to call this out though too. Um, just because you can does not mean that you should. Hey, I've got a lot of leftovers, so I'm going to rinse it off and now give it. If you've already fed your, dogs their meals for the day, let's keep that in mind too.
Oh,
Maybe,
sure.
save a good chunk of that. I do meal preps typically on the weekends for the week, and I've got it portioned out and this and that. And my kids and my wife have, and even relatives and friends been around me enough to know, like, hey, I don't mind if Belle or Sugar or Zoe, etc., got that, but you got to let me know because that's how she gets overweight. That's how I don't know what's going on if her system has a reaction to something. So there is that balance. We talk about overweight, and we'll talk about it a lot more. But I also wanted to hit on this too because I love something you just hit on. They're gonna love it, whether it's rinsed off. They're gonna love it, by the way. And this is one of my favorite like shopping tips with everything. Everybody's under so much pressure with costs and all the rest of that. There are so many great fresh foods available because the stores need to sell it by that day. That is a great way to
Yeah.
get real fresh foods into your pet's diet. And so I didn't want to let that opportunity pass to call that out because I think that it's something I practice constantly.
Yeah.
Um, there have been times I've bought things specifically for the dogs, and the family's going, "What about us?" So don't miss that opportunity when you're out shopping. That's a
No,
great.
absolutely. And also, when people say I know no dogs are not supposed to have people food, I'll always look at them and say, it depends. What do you eat? Because if you're eating nothing but nachos and burritos and you're not eating healthy yourself, you're eating um, you know,
Double stuffed Oreos. Feel free to send me
double
some.
stuffed or oh God, that's chocolate. If you're eating anything that is processed yourself, I don't know,
Yeah,
potato skins, things like that. All of those things, those aren't good for you, but we're not here to talk about you. We're here to talk
yeah,
about your animals. And those are things that are rich that sometimes don't digest well. I mean, a lot of times pancreatitis and things like that are caused by things that animals aren't supposed to be eating anyway,
right, right.
you
No,
know?
and or they're getting too much of something.
Right.
Everything in moderation. We have carob chips because we don't have a lot of chocolate here in the house, and there are times where I'm eating some carob chips. Belle's going, "Hey, if you drop one, that's okay." And I'm like, "If I drop one, that's okay. But if I drop 10, I don't need you eating all 10 of those, right? Because that may be too much for her system, depending on your size of your dog." And that's the other, I'm sure you get this panic call. "Oh my God, my dog got a sliver of, chocolate or this or that.
My
Should I
dog ate a
rush?
grape.
Yeah. Should I rush to the vet?" That's always your call. I'm going to respect that. But I'll just say, you know, when you're someone from my family calling, I'm saying, how big's your dog? How big was what they had? Let's watch them. I think they're going to be okay. Because I understand the overreaction. I don't want anything to happen. If Bella sneezes, I'm there with a tissue and, a full doctor kit, ready to take vitals. But sometimes the overreactions especially when you've got a lot of friends and you're all our, well, you're really Lauren's friends. Feel free to send those texts and emails to her when you have those questions. But when you have a lot of friends and people that reach out to you, it does sometimes make you go, wow, I would think we'd learn this after time, but folks still haven't. So
Well, when you have something even peripherally or subliminally, when you hear something like grapes are bad, grapes are poisonous, grapes are deadly, it at some point takes hold and you think, oh, my dog ate a grape. And it's about the degree of poison.
right.
It's about the level of toxicity, which goes to your size comment, but also it's the varying things of milk chocolate versus dark chocolate, a green grape versus a black grape. There are so many other things to consider. How's the dog behaving? If it and I would do the same thing in my group. I'd say if you're nervous about it, then go to the vet. But
And that's such a good call out too, because again, our pets feed off of our energy. That's the number one thing for me. So
right.
if you're freaking out, we're headed down a spiral anyway.
Well, because you're going to question it anyway, and you're going to be agonizing over it. So if you're
Yeah.
so freaked out about it that you wonder if you should go to the vet, you probably should go to the vet for your own peace of mind. But typically, it's shocking how how kids can deal with some of those things. Now, I have at times posted that kind of thing, and invariably someone somewhere along the way will say, well, I know a dog that blah blah. Yes, yes, there are dogs that don't react well, but without you being able to tell me all of the factors involved, I can't even comment. So the person should have gone to the vet. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm not telling you not to go to the vet. I'm just telling you that not everything is necessarily as deadly as we may have been told. I mean, it's there's some we're deviating from our original topic, getting into
Right. No,
vitamins and
I got you.
food.
But these are these that's the slippery slope.
Yeah, that's how
That's
you and I are.
yeah, that and well, I just mean that's how people it starts with, oh my gosh, something's happening, and before you know it, it's do I need to go to the vet for this? Do I need to go to the vet for that? I need always if that's where your head is at, that's your call. Get over there for your peace of mind.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the most important thing. That's what your pet they're looking at you to see your reaction, and that's just a part of this whole discussion there. But you are correct. We do want to make sure we respect everybody's time. So maybe we'll hold off on some of the other elements of this for part 735 of Evergreens. But if you've got something out there that you all have dealt with, you're dealing with, let us know what steps you're taking. What's your criteria? What's your checklist? How do you do things? Share those with us, practicalpetchat@gmail.com. Share a comment on any of the social media platforms we're on. And just thank you all for being here. Lauren, thank you as always. Really appreciate you.
And tell your pets we love them.
Yes. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.